So imagine walking into one of those brand new multi-million-dollar corporate innovation labs. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. The ones with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the bright beanbag chairs everywhere.
Right, and like those incredibly expensive digital ideation screens mounted on every single surface.
Yeah, and usually an espresso machine that looks like it belongs on a spaceship.
Exactly. I mean, the company has clearly spared absolutely no expense. But if you actually sit in that room for a week, you'll probably notice something really eerie.
Let me guess. Absolute silence.
Yes. Nobody's using those fancy screens. Nobody is, pitching wild, disruptive ideas. It's just a quiet room.
It's a remarkably common scenario, honestly, because there's this universal truth in the modern workplace. Like every organization loudly broadcasts that they want disruption. They want game-changing ideas.
They print it on posters and put it in the break room.
Right. But when you look at the actual day-to-day operations, the leadership teams running those companies are often, well, secretly terrified of the exact innovation they're asking for.
Because innovation means changing things.
Exactly. True innovation requires challenging the status quo. And the status quo is where management feels safe. It's where they're in control.
So to solve that discomfort, they just sort of throw money at the aesthetics of innovation instead.
Yeah, it's easier to buy the beanbags.
It totally reminds me of someone building this incredibly expensive, state-of-the-art kitchen. Like they install the imported marble countertops, they buy those $1,000 Japanese
Oh,
knives.
and the massive professional-grade stove.
Right. But then they completely forget to run a gas line to the house.
That's a great way to put it.
And then they just stand there, staring at their raw ingredients, acting totally shocked that nothing is cooking.
Well, the infrastructure is entirely useless without the underlying energy source to ignite it. And that invisible energy source, the actual fuel that makes the machinery of innovation run, that's the entire focus of the research we're exploring today.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at a really foundational study by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. It's titled Leadership as the Catalyst, Building Psychological Safety to Unlock Organizational Innovation.
A fantastic piece of research.
It really is. We're going to figure out the exact missing ingredient that turns a hesitant, stagnant team into a total powerhouse. And we're going to give you the specific blueprint for how leaders actually create this environment.
And what makes this study so compelling is that it isn't just theoretical fluff.
No, not at all.
Dr. Westover gathered hard data from 620 employees across a really diverse range of sectors. We're talking banking, healthcare, telecom, and specifically this was done in Pakistan.
Which is such an important detail.
It's a vital piece of the puzzle because, so much of our standard workplace literature comes from Western contexts,
Where it's kind of normal to treat your boss like a buddy.
right? It's what we call low power distance. Employees naturally feel a bit more comfortable pushing back. But by looking at these dynamics in Pakistan, which is the high power distance collectivist culture, we get a much more robust, universally applicable understanding of human behavior.
Like the ultimate stress test for the theory.
Exactly. If you can unlock grassroots innovation in an environment where authority is deeply revered and hierarchy is super rigid, you can unlock it absolutely anywhere.
Okay, but before we can fix this lack of innovation, we kind of have to define what we are actually failing to do, because the corporate world has this really bad habit of confusing creativity with what this study calls innovative work behavior.
And they sound like synonyms, but they're completely different animals.
Right.
The distinction is where most companies trip up. So creativity is essentially cognitive. It's sitting at your desk, looking at a spreadsheet, and suddenly realizing, oh, I could automate this task and cut a 5-step process down to 2.
Having the idea.
Right. That novel, useful thought, is creativity. But innovative work behavior, or IWB, is behavioral. It's multi-stage. It requires generating the idea, promoting the idea, and finally actually implementing it.
It's basically the difference between sketching a beautiful blueprint on a napkin and actually pouring the concrete to build the house.
Spot on. To achieve that implementation, an employee needs a highly proactive agentic orientation. They have to actively advocate for their concept.
Which is exhausting.
It is. They have to build a coalition of supporters, secure buy-in from skeptical managers, and physically push through the inevitable bureaucratic friction to make the change a reality.
So if they just have the thought but don't fight for it.
And the idea is functionally useless to the organization. And what's really fascinating here is that innovation is incredibly unevenly distributed within companies.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you will frequently find one specific team that is constantly experimenting and adapting, while a team right down the hall doing the exact same work is completely rigid and risk-averse.
Oh,
And the data shows this discrepancy relies almost entirely on the interpersonal dynamics of those specific teams, not on any company-wide suggestion box or software.
I do have to push back on this a little bit, though.
Sure.
When you describe this multi-stage process of, like, building coalitions and securing buy-in, isn't that management's job?
That's a very common reaction.
I mean, why is the burden suddenly being placed on the everyday employee to not only come up with the brilliant idea, but also play corporate politics, champion it, and drag it through the mud just to get it implemented?
That frustration makes total sense, but it fundamentally misjudges where the actual granular knowledge lives inside a business.
Okay, explain that.
Management is frequently blind to the operational realities on the front line. The executives sitting up in the C-suite simply do not know that a specific piece of customer onboarding software takes 10 unnecessary agonizing clicks.
Because they never actually use it.
Exactly. It frustrates every single user, but the frontline employee is the one who knows. They feel the pain of that inefficiency every single day. If that employee doesn't take the initiative to champion the solution, management will never even know the opportunity for improvement existed in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if championing these ideas is so crucial for an organization to survive,
Right.
why is it so incredibly rare? Why are those expensive innovation labs just sitting there empty?
Because speaking up is socially dangerous.
Right.
It requires an employee to stick their neck out. And this brings us to the core mechanism of the entire study, psychological safety.
Which is a term that gets thrown around a lot in like corporate training seminars, but it actually has a very rigorous scientific definition, right? Going back to Amy Edmondson's research in 1999.
It does. Edmondson defined it as the shared belief within a team that interpersonal risks are welcomed, not punished.
So think about the mechanics of proposing a new idea. You are implicitly saying the way we are currently doing things is flawed.
Right. It's an inherent critique of the system. And if you lack psychological safety, you assume that critique is going to be met with defensiveness or blame or outright retaliation from your leadership.
It's like we all carry around this invisible social credit score at work.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like every time you challenge the status quo or point out that the emperor has no clothes, you feel like you're taking all your hard-earned chips, your reputation, your chance at a promotion, your relationship with your boss, and you are betting them on a single untested idea.
And if you don't feel completely safe, you're not going to make that bet.
No way. You just hold on to your chips, you stay quiet, and you do what you're told.
Exactly. The academic terms for holding on to those chips are self-censorship and learned helplessness. And going back to the cultural context of Dr. Westover's study in Pakistan, this dynamic is amplified tremendously.
Because of the hierarchy.
Yes. In a high-power distance culture, prioritizing group harmony over blunt candor is a very strong societal norm.
So if you are, say, a junior analyst, speaking up with an unconventional idea isn't just seen as being a helpful disruptor. It can actually be perceived as actively, personally disrespectful to the manager who designed the current process.
Exactly. It threatens to cause a severe loss of face for both the leadership and the employee who spoke out of turn. So the default survival mechanism is just silence.
But the cost of that silence has to be huge.
It is staggering when you look at the macro data. The study reveals that organizations in the top quartile of employee-driven innovation see a 25% higher productivity growth over a 5-year period compared to their low innovation peers.
Wait, really? A 25% difference in productivity just from employees feeling safe enough to share their workarounds?
Just from that. And in high-stakes environments, the consequences go far beyond just revenue.
Like what?
In healthcare settings, the research demonstrates that high psychological safety reduces patient safety incidents by up to 30%. Yeah. And that happens simply because a nurse feels safe pointing out a near miss or a subtle flaw in a medical protocol before a patient actually gets hurt.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the statistical weight in this study really proves how disproportionate a leader's influence is over this entire dynamic.
The regression analysis is striking. The study found that leadership support predicts psychological safety with a beta coefficient of beta 0.58.
Okay, can you translate that into practical terms for us?
Sure. Basically, for every single step a leader takes to demonstrate genuine support, the psychological safety of the team jumps by over half a step. It is a massive direct lever.
It's not random.
Not at all. Leadership behavior creates the climate, and the climate dictates whether employees will actually engage in that innovative work behavior.
Okay, so we know fear and rigid hierarchy are the roadblocks. But how do leaders actually dismantle them? Like, how do we turn the gas on in that fancy kitchen we talked about earlier?
That's the best part of the study. It transitions from just diagnosing the problem to providing a heavily researched playbook of strategies backed by real-world corporate examples.
So let's explore how companies are actually pulling this off, starting with how they handle the flow of information.
Right. The foundational lever is transparent communication and leader accessibility. Psychological safety literally cannot exist if the leadership team feels like an impenetrable fortress.
Makes sense.
The study highlights HCL Technologies, which is a massive IT services firm. Their former CEO, Vinay Nair, launched a digital portal called You and I, like you and I,
Okay.
and it allowed any employee, regardless of their rank or location, to ask the executive team literally anything.
But the crucial mechanic of that portal wasn't just the ability to ask a question, right? It was that the questions and the executive's answers were visible to the entire company.
Yes. By making that dialogue public, the CEO is systematically dismantling the symbolic barriers of the hierarchy.
Because everyone is watching.
Exactly. When a junior developer sees the CEO thoughtfully answering a really tough question about company strategy without getting defensive, it provides undeniable proof that vulnerability is safe. It overrides the cultural fear of speaking to authority.
Okay, so once that baseline of communication is established, we get to what I think is the most controversial part of the playbook.
Procedural justice.
Yes, procedural justice, and specifically the fair treatment of mistakes. The study points to the Tata Group, the massive multinational conglomerate.
Right.
They actually instituted an annual Dare to Try award, which literally hands out a physical award to employees for bold ideas that completely, spectacularly fail.
We're deliberately separating the quality of the attempt from the outcome of the experiment.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because I guarantee you someone listening right now is rolling their eyes.
Oh, for sure.
They're thinking, wait a minute, rewarding failure, handing out trophies for messing up. Doesn't that just encourage operational sloppiness and total incompetence?
This raises an important question, and we have to be incredibly precise about definitions here.
Please do.
The research draws a thick, uncrossable line between operational sloppiness and what Amy Edmondson calls intelligent failures.
Okay, what's the difference?
If you ignore a standard safety checklist because you were careless, and you break a piece of machinery, that is not an intelligent failure. That is negligence. And absolutely no organization should reward that.
Right. An intelligent failure, then, is a thoughtful, well-researched experiment in uncharted territory that just simply didn't yield the result you hypothesized.
Exactly. You did the math, you took a calculated risk to improve a process, and the market or the system just said no.
So when Tata Group celebrates those specific types of failures, they are basically running blameless postmortems.
Yes. Instead of hunting for a scapegoat to punish, they analyze the system factors. They extract the valuable data from that failure so the entire conglomerate gets smarter.
Because if you punish an employee for an intelligent failure, you guarantee that no one in that department will ever run an experiment again.
100%. It kills the momentum instantly.
It makes perfect sense. But once employees aren't terrified of failing, they actually need the power to execute. Which brings us to the next point: empowerment and autonomy.
Right. Because if every tiny adjustment to a workflow requires like 3 levels of signature approval from headquarters, employees will quickly do the math and realize the bureaucratic friction isn't worth their energy.
The momentum of an idea just dies in committee.
Exactly. The study illustrates the solution through Bank Alfala in Pakistan. They initiated an Innovation Champions program that pushed decision-making power to the very edges of the organization.
So down to the branch level.
Yes. They allowed branch-level employees to pilot service improvements completely on their own, provided it fell under a specific budget. They totally bypassed headquarters approval.
Imagine being a branch worker who notices a bottleneck in how customers line up for tellers. Instead of drafting a 20-page proposal to a vice president they've never met, they are given the autonomy to just rearrange the floor plan and test a new queue system the very next morning.
It's revolutionary. The study notes this single program resulted in over 150 implemented innovations.
Just from that one program.
Yeah. ranging from minor customer onboarding tweaks to major mobile banking features. Giving people true discretion over their immediate environment intrinsically motivates them.
But autonomy in a vacuum can eventually lead to burnout, right? If the organization doesn't acknowledge the extra effort.
Absolutely. You have to reinforce the behavior through visible recognition.
Which is exactly what Pakistan International Airlines, or PIA, did during a particularly tough financial period. They launched a Turnaround Ideas campaign. They bypassed their executives entirely and went straight to the everyday staff for solutions.
And when frontline workers came up with viable route optimizations and fuel efficiency ideas, the airline didn't just quietly implement them and take the credit.
No, they publicly recognized and financially rewarded those specific employees.
And the visibility of the reward is just as important as the financial aspect, because it signals to the entire workforce, look, we genuinely value this proactive behavior. It proves to all the skeptics that sticking your neck out and risking your social capital is actually worth the effort.
When you start truly recognizing where the best ideas come from, you quickly realize that leadership doesn't have a monopoly on good solutions.
Not even close.
That leads to the final strategy: inclusive decision-making. The Aga Khan University Hospital realized that if they wanted better safety protocols, they couldn't just have senior doctors drafting rules in a locked boardroom.
Which is how it's traditionally done.
Right. So they created these quality and safety councils that mandated the active participation of frontline nurses and support staff in the actual design of the new protocols.
And the psychological mechanism at play there is ownership. When employees are invited into the messy process of diagnosing a problem and designing the solution, they no longer feel like a new rule is being imposed on them from above.
They helped build it.
Exactly. At the hospital, this inclusive approach dramatically boosted the reporting of near misses because the staff inherently trusted the reporting process that they had a hand in creating.
Okay, so we have this incredibly clear evidence-based playbook. You open up communication channels, you treat intelligent failures fairly, you push autonomy to the front lines, you recognize the effort, and you include everyday workers in the decision-making process.
It's a great blueprint.
It is. But here's my worry. This sounds fantastic if you have a visionary, enlightened CEO who reads this research and personally drives these changes. But what happens when that leader gets promoted or poached by a rival company?
Oh, the whole thing can collapse.
Right. How do you ensure the psychological safety doesn't just, pack up its desk and leave the building with them?
That is the ultimate test of an organization. Long-term resilience. You cannot rely on a heroic leader to sustain this climate.
So what do you do?
You have to weave these behaviors so deeply into the organizational DNA that they survive any personnel change. The research points to 3 structural ways to embed this, starting with psychological contract recalibration.
Okay, I want to make sure we really understand that term. What does the psychological contract actually look like in practice?
Well, traditionally, the unspoken contract between an employer and an employee has been purely transactional. Like, you give me quiet compliance and loyalty, and I give you a paycheck and job security.
Keep your head down, do the work.
Exactly. But to sustain innovation, you have to explicitly rewrite that contract from day one. Innovation cannot be treated as a fun, optional bonus activity that you do on a Friday afternoon if your real work is finished.
Right.
It must be codified in role descriptions, embedded in performance review criteria, and utilized in hiring metrics. Continual learning, questioning processes, and experimenting must be defined as non-negotiable core parts of the job.
It becomes the standard operating procedure, not an extra credit assignment.
Exactly. Now, the second structural change is distributed leadership.
Okay.
You cannot have all the psychological safety flowing from a single manager. You have to build networks of peer coaching. You start rotating who facilitates the weekly team meetings. So every single person gets practice in drawing out dissenting opinions and making space for diverse voices.
So it's not always the boss running the show.
Right. You build internal innovation ambassador networks. The safety has to live at the peer-to-peer level, so the culture isn't held hostage by the mood of the senior vice president on any given day.
That makes a lot of sense. And the final piece of embedding this into the DNA is measurement.
Yes. The old business cliche is true. What gets measured gets managed.
Because you cannot manage an invisible dynamic.
Right. Organizations have to run frequent, anonymous employee pulse surveys specifically designed to track perceptions of psychological safety. And crucially, you have to track leading indicators, like the rate of new idea submissions or the number of experiments run.
rather than just waiting for lagging indicators like quarterly revenue.
Exactly. If you look at your dashboard and see that idea submissions in a specific department had suddenly dropped to zero, the data is screaming at you that the psychological safety in that room has collapsed, and leadership needs to intervene immediately.
So what does this all mean? As I'm listening to explain this necessary shift from a single visionary leader to a systemic, company-wide structure, I keep thinking about the process of going to the gym.
Okay, I like this. How so?
Well, a really great supportive manager is basically like an amazing personal trainer. They are incredibly helpful, they correct your form, they motivate you to push harder when you want to quit.
For sure.
But a personal trainer is temporary. If you want to stay physically fit for the rest of your life, you can't just rely on hiring someone to yell at you every morning.
You need a system.
Exactly. You need to build a routine that tracks your progress, which is the measurement piece. You need workout buddies to keep you accountable when the trainer isn't there, which is the distributed leadership. And you need a fundamental lifestyle change where fitness is just integrated into who you are. And that is the psychological contract recalibration.
That is a perfect analogy. The systemic structures are the exact things that allow the behaviors to survive the inevitable turnover in leadership. The gym analogy captures the required discipline perfectly.
This research has just been such a massive paradigm shift. If we distill this entire deep dive down, the core truth is that innovation isn't magic.
Not at all.
It isn't the result of hiring a few eccentric, creative geniuses and putting them in a glass room with beanbags. True innovation is the highly predictable, almost mechanical result of psychological safety.
It really is.
When leaders stop defaulting to blame, when they replace defensiveness with genuine curiosity, and when they grant actual messy autonomy to their teams, employees will naturally step up. Because at our core, we actually want to solve the problems in front of us.
We are natural problem solvers, but only when we don't feel like we are going to be punished for pointing out the existence of the problem in the first place.
Absolutely. And for you listening right now, it is crucial to remember that this isn't just a lesson for CEOs.
No, everyone plays a part.
Whether you are a senior executive, a middle manager, or a junior team member who just started 3 weeks ago, you are constantly signaling to your colleagues what is safe and what is dangerous in your specific environment. Every interaction, every Slack message, every look you give in a meeting is a data point for them.
We all actively contribute to the climate of the room we are sitting in.
We really do. We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how leadership reacts to mistakes and how executives build this environment.
Yeah.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over regarding your own behavior as a peer.
This is so important.
Tomorrow morning, when a coworker pitches a truly half-baked, confusing idea in a meeting, or when they nervously pull you aside to admit they totally messed up a shared spreadsheet, think about how your immediate micro-reaction will dictate the future of that team.
Yeah, what's your face doing in that moment?
Exactly. Will you let out a heavy, exhausted sigh? Will you give them a judgmental raised eyebrow? Or will you lean in with curiosity and ask them to walk you through their thought process? Because in that split second, you are either building up or instantly destroying the psychological safety of the person sitting right next to you. It's entirely up to you whether or not you turn on the gas.